afternoon. The Higher Education Workforce Development Budget Division will now be in order. Today's date is February 24th. So today we're actually going to have part of the committee in the budget division, and then we'll gavel out and gavel back in to hear 3 bills in our policy committee. So we haven't done that yet this session. It's a little awkward, but that's how it has to be done. So it doesn't mean anything for anybody who's watching. It just means that after we hear one bill, we'll just hit this and start back up in another policy. So we're going to begin this hearing with Senator Nelson's bill. We're very, very anxious to hear Senate File 247 dealing with Alzheimer's. And we've been anxiously awaiting the opportunity to hear about this effort. So thank you, Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I am very happy to be here today, and I do have an author's amendment, which I believe is in your packet. If I could add that at this time.
Very good. Senator Nelson moves the A7 amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion adopted. So it's an author's amendment, so this now allows us, thank you for correcting me, Senator Miller. Oh, now we do have a quorum, but so we're gonna move that one more time, Senator Nelson.
Madam Chair, I'd like to move the A7 amendment as an author amendment on Senate File 247.
Being that we now have a quorum, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is adopted. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. What I'd like to do today is just briefly tell you what the amended bill does in just a couple sentences, and then I would like to turn it over to our testifiers today to explain why this bill is so important. This bill, Senate File 247, is the Alzheimer's Research and Support Act. It basically does 5 things. First, it finances research, much needed research, into the cures, treatment, and diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. That would be funded through the already successful partnership, the University Minnesota partnership. And then secondly, the bill also has grants, competitive grants administered through the Board of Aging, the Minnesota Board of Aging, to promote the benefits of early diagnosis, awareness of Alzheimer's, and connect caregivers with education and research. There are 2 types of those dementia grants. One is statewide. The second is for regional and local projects. And finally, the bill sets up the Alzheimer's Public Communications Program. And I will be glad to talk more about those as we go through the bill, but for the moment, I would like to introduce to you our testifiers to explain why I brought this bill today. I will tell you, I brought this bill as Alzheimer's became very personal and something that my family, as many of yours as well, is becoming aware of. It's a tsunami that is facing us. And I brought, today we have Dr. Ron Peterson, Director of Mayo Clinic Alzheimer's Research Center and Chair of the National Alzheimer's Project Council, who has come with us today to testify.
And Senator Nelson,
yes.
In terms of the specifics in your amendment, would you like us to ask questions on that after we've heard the testimony?
I would, if that's okay.
Sure.
I think it will
Absolutely.
make more sense if we just talk about the bill in its amended form.
Good, thank you. Dr. Peterson.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, my name is Ron Peterson, and I'm the director of the Mayo Clinic Alzheimer's Disease Research Center and director of the Mayo Clinic Study of Aging in Rochester, Minnesota. Both of these projects are funded by the National Institutes of Health and conduct research on aging, Alzheimer's disease, and other dementias. This is an exciting time to be involved in both research and care for patients with Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. And I'm thrilled that Minnesota will be taking on the challenge of addressing these issues in a proactive fashion. The time is now. Currently, there are approximately 100,000 people in Minnesota diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and this translates to over 5 million people nationally. Alzheimer's disease is a global phenomenon, and there are probably 30 million people worldwide who have the disease. The toll that dementia takes on individuals and families is incalculable. The impact on society is enormous. We have been proactive here in Minnesota to address these issues in many ways, and I'll return to that in just a moment. From a national perspective, Congress unanimously passed the National Alzheimer's Project Act in 2010, and the President signed it immediately in 2011. That law required the Secretary of Health and Human Services, then Kathleen Sebelius, to develop a national plan to address Alzheimer's disease, since this had never been done in this country previously. As part of the charge, Secretary Sebelius appointed an advisory council on research, care, and services, and I was honored to be chosen as chair of that committee. The council oversees the plan, gives recommendations to the Secretary and directly to Congress on how to deal with Alzheimer's disease now and in the future. The plan outlines an ambitious goal of preventing and effectively treating Alzheimer's disease by 2025, just 10 short years away. The plan is divided into 5 goals covering research, clinical care, caregiver support, education and awareness, and metrics of progress. The law required the plan to be revised annually, and the Council is busily generating its recommendations for the 2015 plan presently. While it is difficult to be certain if the plan has had any definite impact thus far, funding for Alzheimer's disease at the National Institutes of Health has risen over 20% in the last few years, and it's likely that the attention that Alzheimer's disease is receiving through the national plan has played a role. There's been increased interest in dementia globally as well. In December of 2013, David Cameron, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, used the last summit of his G8 presidency to focus on dementia. As a follow-up to that meeting, several legacy events occurred in 2014, and a couple more will continue in 2015, designed to carry out the recommendations that ensued from the G8 summit. Prime Minister Cameron also established a World Dementia Council to coordinate issues among the G7 countries following the summit in London. I was also honored to be appointed to that council as well, and we will be meeting in Geneva next month to discuss the progress that has been made since the summit. The overall impact of this is to emphasize the point that dementia, and particularly Alzheimer's disease, is a global issue that impacts millions of individuals, families, and the economic pictures of all countries. I'm proud to say that Minnesota has been a leader among states in addressing the Alzheimer's crisis. There are approximately 35 states in this country that have state plans for Alzheimer's disease, but only about 6 or so have actual funding tied to the plans. In 2011, Minnesota published a comprehensive plan to prepare for the developing epidemic of dementia. This plan led to the creation of Act on Alzheimer's, a collaborative effort in which people from community sectors throughout Minnesota work together to accomplish transformative work on Alzheimer's disease. This effort includes work to build dementia-capable communities throughout the state. I can say that the impact of Act on Alzheimer's thus far has been far-reaching. The director of that program, Olivia Mastry, was invited to address the Advisory Council on Research, Care, and Services for the National Alzheimer's Project Act, and she impressed the entire council with the forethought and accomplishments of Act on Alzheimer's thus far. The program has received recognition with national awards and is being considered for broad adoption throughout the country and internationally. Minnesota should be proud of this effort since it's leading the way in developing dementia-capable communities. I'd like to say just a few words about the disease process itself, since the language sometimes gets confusing. Dementia refers to a change in the brain that results in difficulties in thinking and one's ability to carry out daily activities. Alzheimer's disease is just one form of dementia, but up and away is the leading cause of dementia. However, other forms such as frontotemporal lobar degeneration and dementia with Lewy bodies are equally devastating disorders. Currently, a great deal of research is focused on the early identification of the disease process with hope of early intervention. Many studies underway, some in Minnesota, dealing with typical aging populations, trying to identify early features of the disease, perhaps through biomarkers that can be detected in the blood, the cerebrospinal fluid, or using sophisticated imaging techniques of the brain, all designed to detect the earliest risk conditions. Work is being done on genetic predispositions since sometimes dementia runs in families. And the genetic characteristics of the disease can give us potential targets for therapy. With regard to Alzheimer's disease, we know a great deal about the underlying biology and now are able to detect proteins that cause the disease in the brain even when a person is cognitively normal. Our anticipation is that by identifying these hallmarks, we will be able to intervene with therapies. Some of the pioneering and trend-setting work done on Alzheimer's disease and dementia is being conducted in Minnesota. Dr. Karen Ash at the University of Minnesota has done landmark work on the earliest pathologic features of the disease, trying to identify these markers in the blood and cerebrospinal fluid. Again, the vital understanding of the early stages of the disease will likely provide opportunities for intervention. The Minnesota State Plan suggested the development of techniques for the early identification of individuals who might be experiencing cognitive impairment. Health Partners here in the Twin Cities has developed an algorithm to identify possible cognitive impairment in the primary care physician's office. The Affordable Care Act required that the Medicare annual wellness visit now contain an assessment of cognitive function. However, the law did not specify how this should be conducted. Clinicians and investigators at Health Partners have taken it upon themselves to clarify this for primary care physicians to enable them to identify potential problems as early as possible in the pathological cascade. While it is important to identify these illnesses as early as possible to be able to intervene therapeutically, in addition, knowledge about them impacts a person's general medical care, and consequently there can be a strong interaction between one's cognitive function and management of the patient's overall medical condition. In Duluth, the Essentia Institute for Rural Health is carrying out a state-funded project to implement decision support tools to improve dementia diagnosis, treatment, and management in primary care, leveraging the concept of dementia-capable health as an organizing principle of care. At the Mayo Clinic, we have extensive research programs on the development of biomarkers in aging and disease. We have a project underway in Olmsted County that's been operating for over 10 years, looking at individuals who are randomly sampled from the population and evaluated longitudinally. This project has provided enormous information for the field, and several of my colleagues have led the way in describing models of disease progression which help us understand the temporal progression of the various aspects of the disease. We've seen over 5,000 people in Olmsted County and are following many of them on an annual basis to allow us to understand the natural profile of people developing Alzheimer's disease and dementia. This is a truly unique study in the country and perhaps in the world because of the unique situation between the Mayo Clinic and Olmsted County residents. Mayo has been in collaboration with the University of Minnesota in the development of biotechnologies, and many grant opportunities have been shared between the two institutions. we enjoy a very collegial and mutually beneficial relationship. In addition to the groundbreaking research done in Minnesota, Minnesota has also been attentive to the needs of caregivers. The Minnesota Board on Aging has been very active in dealing with issues pertaining to the needs of caregivers and maximizing quality of life for all persons involved. In conclusion, I cannot think of a more timely opportunity for Minnesota to continue to expand its leading role in fighting dementia and Alzheimer's disease. The proposed legislation will augment the resources of an already active community of investigators and provide support for agencies charged with providing these services. The proposed legislation has been thoughtfully composed to include a rigorous scientific review of a competitive grant process which will guarantee the absolute highest level of academic excellence. I am proud to support the state of Minnesota through these activities and look forward to greater progress in combating these dreadful illnesses. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Peterson, and we are so honored to have you here, given the leadership role you're playing on the global effort to deal with Alzheimer's.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Senator Nelson.
If I might, if the committee could hold its questions, it may have questions for Dr. Peterson or others, but if we could maybe have the testifiers testify and then a quick synopsis of the bill and then open for questions.
Perfect.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And the second testifier would be Deborah Richmond, who is Vice President of Education at the Alzheimer's Association of Minnesota and North Dakota.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Deborah Richmond, and I am the Vice President for Education Outreach at the Alzheimer's Association, Minnesota, North Dakota. The Alzheimer's Association is the world's leading voluntary health organization in Alzheimer's care, support, and research. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today regarding Alzheimer's disease, the public health crisis of our time. As Dr. Peterson noted, Alzheimer's is a progressive brain disease that damages and eventually destroys brain cells, leading to a loss of memory, thinking, and other brain functions. It is ultimately fatal. And I would call your attention to the slide behind me. Alzheimer's is currently the 6th leading cause of death in the United States, and the only one of the top 10 without a means to prevent, cure, or slow its progression. Over 5 million Americans are currently living with Alzheimer's, including an estimated 100,000 in Minnesota alone. In addition, more than 245,000 people are providing care for those living with the disease. With the first of the baby boom generation already over age 65, this group is expected to double by 2030. Currently, 1 in 9 Minnesotans age 65 and older has the disease, and 1 in 3 over the age of 85. Although Alzheimer's is not normal aging, age is the greatest risk factor for this disease. Taken together, these factors will result in more and more Americans living with Alzheimer's, as many as 16 million by 2050, when there will be nearly 1 million new cases each year. While deaths from other major diseases, including heart disease, stroke, and HIV, continue to experience significant declines, those from Alzheimer's have increased 68% between 2000 and 2010. Direct costs of health care and long-term care for people living with Alzheimer's and other dementias are substantial, making Alzheimer's the most expensive disease in America. A newly released 2015 report, Changing the Trajectory of Alzheimer's Disease, How a Treatment by 2025 Saves Lives and Dollars, calculates that a treatment introduced in 2025 that delays the onset of Alzheimer's by 5 years would reduce the number of individuals affected by the disease and total costs of care by all payers. A treatment in 2025 that delays the onset of Alzheimer's would cut the number of people in 2050 who have the disease by 42%, from 13.5 million to 7.8 million. The Alzheimer's Association report also shows the positive impact of adequate funding and the potential consequences of underfunding. People living with Alzheimer's and other dementias and their families would also see a reduction in their out-of-pocket costs. Compared to the current trajectory without a treatment, families would save $87 billion, or 44% of what they would otherwise spend in 2050. Reaching the 2025 goal would save payers $220 billion over the first 5 years and $367 billion in 2050 alone. Savings to Medicare and Medicaid would account for nearly 60% of the savings. In 2030, Medicaid savings would total $16 billion. In 2050, Medicaid costs would be $99 billion, a savings of $77 billion compared to the current trajectory. Total costs to all payers by 2030 would decrease from $451 billion under the current trajectory to $368 billion, a savings of over $83 billion. Total costs, in 2015, the cost to all payers for the care of people living with Alzheimer's disease and other dementias will total an estimated $226 billion, with Medicare and Medicaid paying 68% of the costs. Without a treatment, costs are projected to increase to more than $1.1 trillion in 2050. Alzheimer's disease is an epidemic. Currently, 11% of Minnesotans over age 65 are living with the disease. More Minnesota families are going to be touched by Alzheimer's, and at a frightening rate. Alzheimer's is the public health crisis of this century and the defining disease of the baby boom generation. For millions of Americans, the heartbreak of watching a loved one struggle with Alzheimer's is a pain they know all too well. In addition to the human suffering caused by Alzheimer's disease, it creates an enormous strain on the healthcare system and significant burdens on family, state, and federal budgets. In 2009, the Minnesota legislature created the Alzheimer's Disease Working Group. In 2011, this group released a report detailing recommendations carving a path for the state to address the growing Alzheimer's disease crisis. The report, Preparing Minnesota for Alzheimer's, the Budgetary, Social, and Personal Impacts, recommends steps that transform Minnesota into a state that is ready, willing, and able to meet the challenges of Alzheimer's disease. It also recommends that the state continue aggressive research for prevention, treatment, and a cure of Alzheimer's. Minnesota is already a leader in addressing the Alzheimer's crisis and has a strong tradition of excellence in Alzheimer's and dementia research. Our state is home to the internationally recognized Alzheimer's Disease Research Center at Mayo Clinic and the unique partnership referenced of biotechnology and medical genomics with the State, University of Minnesota, and Mayo Clinic. Several Alzheimer's projects have been funded in this venture. Successful passage of this legislation would further leverage your continued commitment. The medical infrastructure is in place for Alzheimer's research projects, and continued investment in research could result in key findings leading to a solution. Given the growing burden Alzheimer's puts on our state, a commitment to research today will yield savings tomorrow. Minnesota families impacted by Alzheimer's and other dementias appreciate the steadfast support of the Minnesota legislature. We look forward to your continued commitment to address the public health crisis of Alzheimer's disease, and we ask this committee to take the lead in the 2015 session with a commitment equal to the scale of the crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Nelson.
Oh, thank you very much. Madam Chair, I'd also like to call on Dr. Marv Lofquist, who is a member of the Alzheimer's Association Early State Advisory Council.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Marvin Lofquist, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. In May of 2012, at age 68, I was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. This diagnosis came only 2 years after I retired. I earned my doctorate in chemistry from Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, and taught chemistry at Ferris State University in Michigan, and eventually moved into administration. Prior to my retirement, I served for 18 years as an associate dean in the College of Arts and Sciences back at Northwestern. Over the years, my avocation has been to give back to my community by serving on the boards of various organizations, including a public school board, a history center, and a retirement community. Most recently, I had to resign from my last board position at an academic institution because my Alzheimer's disease made it impossible to function at an acceptable level. As a person living with early-stage Alzheimer's, I want to be an advocate for people living with this disease. I also believe it's important to be open with others in order to reduce the stigma associated with this disease and to be surrounded by support. In a personal way, when I talk to other people about the disease, I am also talking to myself. As I am encouraging others to be strong in their determination to live well with the disease, I am also hearing this message and strengthening my own resolve. While I may be memory challenged as a result of my disease, I am still here. I am still cognitive. I am still whole. I am still me. Having a PhD in chemistry gives me the natural inclination to look for ways to support research to combat this disease. This motivation led me to enroll in the Alzheimer's Association trial match and the pursuit of participation in clinical trials. Research is the way we learn how things work. Research is how we can find what molecular changes are helpful and which are not. Disease is the result of unhelpful changes. We need to find ways to stop those unhelpful changes or reverse them. Sounds simple to me, but as you know, it is far more complex. Addressing the scourge of Alzheimer's means supporting people living with the disease, their care partners, and those doing the research to find a way to end Alzheimer's. These endeavors have costs, but they have value beyond calculation. Your support is monumental in the effort to end Alzheimer's. Thank you very much.
Well, Dr. Lofquist, thank you for your courage and coming here to share your story. As Senator Nelson knows, it's personal for me too, is we have a family member also with some form of that disease. And so I'm just very proud that you are able to come and share the way you have.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you.
Chair Bonoff, we have one other testifier, and that is Dr. Lingley, Professor, VFW Endowed Chair at the Department of Experimental and Clinical Pharmacology at the University of Minnesota. Dr. Lee.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, my name is Ling Li, and I'm the professor and a VFW Endowed Chair for Pharmacotherapy for the Elderly in the College of Pharmacy at the University of Minnesota. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share with you all about some of the research we do on Alzheimer's disease. So our research has been focused on the connections between cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and Alzheimer's disease. So compelling evidence has shown that there is a very close connection between the heart disease and Alzheimer's disease, and the brain health is actually significantly affected by heart health and blood vessels. So the hypothesis driving our research has been what's good for the heart is also good for the brain or for the mind. So we have been using a combination of research approaches, including cellular and animal models, to study how the disease developed and to explore the potential of the existing and also new treatments for Alzheimer's disease. So this includes a study the cardiovascular risk factors such as cholesterol, sugar, and insulin, and also inflammation, in the development of Alzheimer's disease. So you probably don't do this every day at home, but we do every day in the school. In my laboratories with the mouse models, we use the animal models of Alzheimer's disease to study these, and we have a test called the Morris water maze test. So it basically used a little swimming pool and to test how the mice perform, spatial learning memory performance in this test. So through the study, what we have found was that high-fat, high-cholesterol diet and excess intake of sugar impairs learning memory functions in these animals. And on the other hand, if you lower the bad cholesterol and boosting the good cholesterol levels and also controlling diabetes, and that will protect their learning memory functions in these animal models. So our research suggests that these strategies that have been developed successfully to treat and prevent cardiovascular disease and diabetes could also be used effectively for fighting against Alzheimer's disease. But as you know, we have a declining funding condition at the federal level. So I think that has limited some of the scopes of research. Just in my own laboratory, I can see that in the past few years, my research teams get smaller. So we couldn't do some of the new initiatives, such as wanting to translate some of those exciting findings in animal models of Alzheimer's disease to humans. So, but as you know, the incidence of Alzheimer's disease, and I mentioned before, is really rising in a skyrocketing rate. So we really cannot wait. So I think the funding or support from our state is really necessary for us to advance the understanding of the disease and to accelerate the discoveries of the treatment or prevention for the disease and improve the health of hundreds, thousands of Minnesotans, and also millions of others affected by this disease over the world, basically in the United States and the entire globe. So currently we know there is no cure for Alzheimer's disease, but we know cardiovascular risk factors are preventable, so they can be prevented. So I really like to use a quote from the first Chinese medical text that is in 2600 BC to end my presentation. So this is a quote here. Superior doctors prevent the disease. Mediocre doctors treat the impending disease. Inferior doctors treat the full-blown disease. So I indeed believe that our best strategy is to fight Alzheimer's disease will be prevented from happening altogether. So this bill, Senator Nelson is proposing, I believe will help us to reach this goal very soon, hopefully. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, and I'm proud to be the senator from where you live, so.
Yes, I live in Plymouth.
Yes, thank you.
Madam Chair, and I would like to thank our testifiers, and I'm wondering if maybe the committee has some questions, and then I'll be glad to go through any specifics in the bill.
Great.
But if there's any
Questions,
questions
members?
for the testifiers.
Who's got questions?
Madam Chair,
Well, I have
take that-
questions.
Okay, Madam
I always
Chair.
wait, but you know.
All right.
So I was wondering, Dr. Peterson, if, I actually had 3 questions. One is, why the rate of Alzheimer's? Is there something that's changed to create the amount of people getting it? It seems, I mean, maybe we just didn't know about it before. That was one question. And actually, either of you could answer. But then the other question is, how does the United States compare in terms of percentage of population to other countries? We had that this morning too, so we're dealing with some weird stuff going on up there. And then the third, and perhaps the one that I'm most interested in, is can you tell us about potential cures? Is that on the horizon, and what would that look like?
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chairman. These are great questions, and it relates somewhat to Dr. Lee's testimony as well. The rates are increasing primarily because age is the biggest risk factor. So with the aging of America and aging of the world, actually, that is the leading cause. So 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 daily. So this is the really pending crisis that's out there. So age, we don't understand exactly what the interaction is between age, but as Dr. Lee indicated, with increasing rates of some cardiovascular risk factors, obesity being one, that the risk of the disease is correlated with that as well. So rate is the limiting factor, and age is the predominant feature for that. Actually, as a side note, from the World Dementia Council, 60% of all dementia is likely to be in low and middle income countries because the advancing age is more dramatic in those countries than it is in the developed countries. So that's why this is a global phenomenon, and WHO is looking at this very carefully. Comparing the United States to other countries, it is a global phenomenon, happens everywhere. There are some differences in dietary habits in certain countries that may alter the rates to a certain extent, again relating to cardiovascular factors. There are some genetic susceptibilities that vary around the world. However, it basically appears everywhere. So it really is a worldwide phenomenon. The cure aspect of it is a challenging one, but as we learn more and more about the underlying biology and our ability to pick up the disease early in the course with regard to these biomarkers, blood test, spinal fluid test, imaging markers, we can now identify people who harbor the biologic characteristics of the disease even while they're normal. The idea being that when we develop these therapies now to intervene on the amyloid protein or the tau protein, we know who has these in the brain. When they're clinically normal, we can intervene at this point in time. But unfortunately, many of the drug trials that have come out in recent years have failed. But at any given time, there are 50 to 75 compounds under investigation at various levels for the disease. So I'm hopeful, but we're not there yet.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? With regard to the bill, Senator Nelson,
Yes.
so the way that your grant works, I guess I'm unclear which part goes to the partnership and which part goes to the aging.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to explain that. The $5 million per year directed towards Alzheimer's research specifically goes to the partnership. That is the first, well, actually with the amendment, I guess it's not the first part of the bill, but that's the section of the bill that this committee would be dealing with. The other dementia grants, which are both statewide and regional dementia grants and the public awareness, that would be through the Department of Health and Human Services, which funds the Minnesota Department of Aging. So the rest of the bill deals with those grants for those connecting resources to caregivers, encouraging early dementia testing, early cognitive testing. Those go through a different committee. And so maybe this committee, I thought, would be most interested in the research aspect of prevention, causes, cures, and treatment.
Very good. And Senator Nelson, I know you asked Mr. Nauman to be here as well to address any, because of the cross jurisdiction of being in both committees. Certainly, Ms. Weidman could address any fiscal implications with regard to our committee, but because we're both, you wanted to make sure Mr. Nauman
Yes.
was on hand. So, Mr. Nauman, is there anything you'd like to add? No. Unless there's questions. Well, thank you for being with us in committee. Ms.
Thank you, Mr.
Weidman,
Nauman.
anything for you?
No, I think Senator Nelson has covered all the major issues.
Okay, good.
Madam Chair, might I just have a few closing comments?
Please.
If there are no more questions. Well, first, I really thank this committee for hearing this bill. I know how tight committee schedules are, and I know how busy you are with all the papers that you have in front of you. So might I just be a teacher for a moment and ask you to look, when you have time, at this particular report, Changing the Trajectory. You saw some of the slides from this report. It basically shows that with research that leads to delaying the onset simply by 5 years, the millions of people who will not have Alzheimer's in the next 35 years. And as policymakers, if you look at the graph that shows the cost borne for Alzheimer's care, it is significant. As our testifier said, $1 trillion in the next 35 years. And the reason that's important to us as policymakers is already in 2014, 68% of Alzheimer's costs were paid for by Medicare and Medicaid. So while we understand with our hearts the personal issues and suffering that comes with Alzheimer's, as policymakers, we need to take strong consideration of the fact that these exorbitant costs are paid for with taxpayer dollars that will be impacting our budgets. So this is a great short read. This trajectory report just released, I think last week or two, is very helpful. And so just in closing, you know, we've talked today about the fact that we really are facing a tsunami of Alzheimer's. It's coming whether we're ready or not. And it seems a bit like the perfect storm. As Chair Bonoff and Dr. Peterson talked about, you know, it's a disease of not normal aging, but the risk increases significantly with aging. And we are an aging population. We're living longer. That's the second characteristic. We're living longer. And thirdly, then, it's this massive demographic that many of us belong to, the baby boomers, 10,000 hitting that age 65, not just today and tomorrow and the next day and the next, but each and every day for the next 19 years. This is a major impact on really all society as we know it. And so I'm excited that in Minnesota, we've really done the groundwork. We've really laid the foundation to be a leader in finding a cure for this disease. This was not in your packet, but you may have seen it last year. This is the work that this legislature authorized preparing Minnesota for Alzheimer's. We have done a wonderful job in addressing the human costs. Those human costs are still significant. Many of us feel them on a daily basis. But Minnesota is setting the standard and has been nationally recognized for building the dementia-capable communities. But the only thing that is going to change the trajectory of this disease, whether it be the great incidence that we will see or the great fiscal costs, is through research. And that's what the bill that we're bringing before you today, the piece that this committee is discussing, is dealing with that research. And I firmly believe that Minnesota is in a position to lead on this research, and I think it's essential. So thank you, Madam Chair and committee.
Thank you. So members, what we're going to do is just lay this bill over for possible inclusion. Now, because it's being laid over in finance, the Health and Human Services Finance Division can just pull it and bring it into their jurisdiction and hear the bill as it relates to their issues as well.
Madam Chair, there is one thing I forgot. I would be negligent if I did not recognize my co-sponsors on this bill. Senator Sharon, Senator Pappas, Senator Cohen, and Senator Rosen have co-sponsored this bill, and I know there are many others who would like to co-sponsor this bill as well. But in the Senate, you know, we have this rule about 5. So thank you, Madam Chair and committee.
Thank you, and thank you to all the testifiers for being with us today. So with that, there being no further business before the Finance Division is adjourned. And Senator Hoffman, you can go ahead while we're getting set up with the new tape.
You never will.
Very good. Now the Higher Education Workforce Development Policy Committee is in order. Senator Hoffman. We've got Senate File 766. So, members, the packets are in front of your, your folders, and the rest of the bills are in those packets. Senator Hoffman.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Thank you for the opportunity to present Senate File 766. It's a proposal to create a grant program for spinal cord and traumatic brain injury research and establishing the Spinal Cord and Traumatic Brain Injury Advisory Council. Madam Chair and members, there is a fiscal note, and it should be in your packets. But before I begin with my presentation, I want to show you there's an A1 amendment to be moved. I would need somebody to move it and put into the bill the shape I want. The A1 is clarifying language that makes sure veterans are included, and it also changes the title from director to commissioner. Mr. Fuller can speak to the A1 if needed.
A4?
Senator Hoffman, it's the A4.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize. A4.
Madam Chair?
And there's nothing to say, yes.
Think nothing.
I would offer the A4 amendment.
Very good. Senator Nelson moves
you.
the A4. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is adopted. Senator Hoffman.
Thank you, Chair and members, for adopting the A4 amendment. I appreciate that. With me at the table today are Joey Carlson and then also Dr. Galen Roxwald from the Hennepin County Medical Center. Chair and members, in the field of neuroscience, research towards solving the currently untreatable effects of paralysis is undergoing significant change. In the past year alone, there are a number of novel strategies being trial tested. But for the first time ever in people with chronic injuries, chronic meaning more than 1 year post-injury. At no time in history has there been more promise for greatly improve upon the complications that come from living with paralysis. These trials have been initiated in states that have mechanisms to seed funding for these small market projects. I'll give you an example. Florida has the Swan Cell Trial. Kentucky, California has a neural stem cells and epidural stimulation. Maryland has neural stem cells, and New Jersey has stem cells as well as others. Several of these academic projects are already spinning off into biotech companies. Those are positioned to commercialize the treatment options. The investment that's called for in Senate File 766 is consistent with Minnesota's legacy as a leader in medical innovation. This innovative investment is an effort to seed existing Minnesota projects that are moving down the same path to accomplish three things. And those three things are simply attract additional National Institute of Health dollars to labs that are more financially stable. Number two is to move those projects from transition to human treatment through the commercialization, thereby strengthening Minnesota's biotech and device industries. And number three is to attract more scientists into this currently underfunded field. Treatment options will provide significant reductions in cost of care, improvements in quality of life, and employability for the 118,500 Minnesotans who live with these injuries. In addition to the resource investment, the Review Council to be established will give members of the spinal cord injury and traumatic brain injury community a voice in determining what projects are considered to be most valuable. With that, Madam Chair, I want to turn this over to Mr. Carlson and Dr. Roxwald.
Welcome.
Hi.
Welcome, Mr. Carlson. And again,
Hi,
I'm
Madam
lucky
Chair.
because you're my constituent also, so.
Yes. Hi, committee members, Madam Chair. My name is Joey Carlson, and I'm here representing the thousands of people with spinal cord injuries in Minnesota. When I was 17 years old, I had one goal. My goal was to speed skate in the 2002 Olympics in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I was actually getting pretty close to that goal. I'd won the National Speed Skating Championships and the North American Speed Skating Championships. Speed skating was my life. But I learned on August 3rd of 2000 that life is subject to change. On my way home from a speed skating practice, I was on Highway 169 and a semi-truck cut me off. When he cut me off, my car rolled in the median twice and the roof collapsed in on my head and badly damaged my spinal cord injury and crushed my 5th, 6th, and 7th vertebrae. And from that time, I've been a C5-6 quadriplegic, and my life has changed in ways I couldn't imagine when I was 17. Today, at night, I'll need help from my parents if I need to go to the bathroom. I have a 2-hour nightly bowel program that I need to go through. I need help turning and positioning in bed, getting dressed, and there's all the little things that are too numerous to mention. Also, I have severe neuropathic pain, and my hips have prematurely gone arthritic, and so I have a lot of pain from them as well. And then there's little tiny things, like the other day when I was going in somewhere, I dropped my phone in the snow, and I had to wait for a long time to find someone to help me pick it up. But I know there's hope. There's been studies going on for a long time, and it used to be my brother would text me or send me an email saying that they did it again, they cured rats, but too bad you're not a rat. but they're moving these trials into humans now, which is great. There's, like he said, there's trials on epidural stimulation where people have already been reporting they're regaining their bowel, bladder, and sexual function, which is huge for someone like me. And this was originally based on a device that Medtronic developed for pain. There's stem cell trials. There's the Schwann cell trials you was talking about uses cells from your nose. And then there's a scaffolding trial from In Vivo Therapeutics that helps bridge the gap with a medical device. Now, I made my life kind of seem kind of gloomy and doomy, but I'm actually a really happy person, and I've accomplished a lot thanks to the great healthcare in Minnesota and the supports that Minnesota has for me. I graduated high school with my class. I have a degree in business, and I have my MBA from the Carlson School of Management, and I work full-time in marketing for UCare. And as a business-savvy person, I know that there's also a business case to be made for having this. Minnesota spends over $500 million on health care for spinal cord injury people, and what we're asking for our spinal cord injury community is less than a percentage of that. And there's these 14 states that he talked about that have had similar state-funded research programs, and they've already seen a return on investment in jobs. And also, as an example, California put in $15 million, and they received $86 million in National Institute of Health grants. So these advances in neuroscience will help me, and they also are likely to have contributions to brain injury, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, MS, and other neurodegenerative diseases. So with your help, we can make Minnesota a leader in healthcare innovation, and also, maybe someday, if I drop my phone in the snow, I'll be able to pick it up by myself.
Aw. Well, boy, that's pretty inspiring. Thank you for sharing your story with the committee, and thanks for writing me. And it was great to meet you in person. Yeah. Yep, Senator Hoffman.
Madam Chair and members, Dr. Galen Roxwald is the medical director of the Traumatic Brain Injury Center at Hennepin County Medical Center and a professor of neurosurgery at the University of Minnesota. He was chief of neurosurgery at HCMC from 1977 until 2011 and is the current chair of the Hennepin Health Foundation. Dr. Roxwald has published over 69 articles in professional journals, authored 13 book chapters, and given over 50 presentations just on the topic of neurotrauma. Been involved with 17 research grants and conducted research on the effects of oxygen and that hypobaric oxygen that's at HCMC and for brain injury. You've been awarded 3 National Institutes of Health grants for this research, and Madam Chair, I'd like to introduce Dr. Galen Rockwell.
Very good, Dr. Rockwell, welcome.
Madam Chairman and committee members, good afternoon. I didn't expect that kind of introduction here. I would emphasize that throughout my career I have taken care of patients with traumatic brain injury and spinal cord injury, literally thousands of patients. I appreciate the opportunity to solicit support for this important bill, supporting research for these 2 devastating injuries. The personal loss and tragedy of a person suffering a spinal cord injury is immediately obvious. I have seen too many families walk up to an ICU bed and hear that their loved one has sustained a spinal cord injury or severe traumatic brain injury. We just heard the moving testimony here from a person who's done that. And I think the quality of life change with a spinal cord injury is so terribly obvious. Traumatic brain injury is a little more complicated. And we in the past have thought of traumatic brain injury striking young people doing stupid things, but it's more and more becoming a problem for the older people. We've heard about our aging population, and falls actually have taken over as the #1 cause of traumatic brain injury as opposed to motor vehicle accidents, representing that change in demographics. Traumatic brain injury has classifications as mild, moderate, and severe. Severe traumatic brain injury is a smaller proportion, but 1/3 of these people die, and perhaps less than 40% make what we call a functional recovery. The mild TBI, or the so-called concussions, the majority recover, but there's a smaller percentage, perhaps 15% or so, that go on to what we call a post-concussive syndrome. And that can be very debilitating, particularly if they're repeated concussions. And we've had a lot of publicity lately from the NFL and other places about the long-term consequences of repeated concussions. And in TBI, it's not always apparent. That's why we've called it the silent epidemic. So given our basic human empathy and compassion, I don't think we need convincing regarding the significance of these injuries to our central nervous system. I think the real question here this afternoon is, why should the Minnesota legislature designate hard-earned Minnesota tax dollars to spinal cord and TBI research? First, I think it's important to understand the economic consequences of these injuries. There are at least 14,000 people that sustain a TBI each year. And those are basically people that seek the ER or the hospital. There's many, many more with concussions that are never reported. There are at least 100,000 Minnesota citizens living with a disability resulting from TBI. The lifetime direct medical costs, as well as the estimated loss of wages for a mild TBI, is about $85,000. For a moderate TBI, about $900,000, and for a severe TBI, about $3 million. There are about 300 spinal cord injuries in the state of Minnesota each year. And the estimated lifetime cost for a 25-year-old quadriplegic is about $3 million. A paraplegic paralyzed from the waist down is about $2 million. So if you combine these two entities, you're talking at least $2 billion a year in direct medical costs and lost economic productivity. Now, the second main issue relates to funding for research. As we've heard before with Alzheimer's, we need research and innovation to move the dial. Neither of these entities has really had the silver bullet in terms of here's a medication, here's a treatment that really makes the difference. Now, I've been the principal investigator, as you've heard, on a number of NIH clinical research with TBI. But there's a gradual, and we've heard this about Alzheimer, funding is going down. For example, the NIH success rate for research proposals in 2002 was 31%, almost a third. In 2014, it was 18%. That's a reduction of 45%. And the percentage of NIH budget going to spinal cord injury and TBI research is around 1% or less. So how could this research fund change that? Now, the NIH, because of scarce dollars, are requiring more and more in the terms of what we call preliminary data. That's phase 1, phase 2 data, so that the scientific basis for the mechanisms and potential for the treatment have to be demonstrated before you can move this into what's called a randomized clinical trial, a phase 3 trial. At present, this is very difficult for young investigators to get this necessary preliminary and basic clinical investigations. It's so daunting that there are fewer and fewer young researchers going, and there's actually people leaving, going to industry and what have you, because they can't get sufficient funding. So these preliminary data is very important to move the dial in terms of developing research that makes a difference. Now, my vision for this research fund would be to cast a wide net for proposals, for innovative projects, for specific treatments for spinal cord injury and TBI, but also for injury prevention and rehabilitation. I think there's major areas there. We have a robust medical technology and scientific community in Minnesota, and that's been particularly mobilized in the area of heart disease, as you all know. And I think Minnesota could be a leader in the area of spinal cord injury and TBI research, which has been so long neglected. I want to emphasize that. For a relatively small investment, I think it could be leveraged to have a major impact on the health of our citizens, as well as the large socioeconomic burden that's created by these injuries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator?
Madam Chair, thank you. We're happy to stand for questions. If there aren't any, then I would like somebody to...
Well, Senator Hoffman, I just have a couple of things I just wanted to add. I see that Rob is sitting there, and I want to acknowledge Rob's presence. And I was reacquainted with a woman that I've known for many years and knew of. Jenny Taylor is behind Rob. Jenny Taylor went to high school with my daughter Lee, and when she was a sophomore, I believe it was a sophomore, Jenny? Yeah, sophomore in high school. I remember the day vividly. There was a half day, and Jenny had a lot of people. They were in a car, and Jenny was in a car accident. And so it's wonderful to see her looking so good here today, and, you know, a surprise. So nice to see you, Jenny. So, Rob, was there anything else you wanted to add?
It's important that we have special money for spinal cord and brain injuries. We're above kind of a special orphan class disease population where there's funds set aside for that, but we're a little bit below the market value to attract real capital from investors, and so this government assistance is definitely necessary for progress in research. And you know, this research also has capability to cross over into other neurodegenerative diseases as well. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Yep. Any questions, members? Thanks for bringing the bill forward. So we would want to entertain a motion because we'd want to pass this bill out of policy and refer it to finance so that then it goes first to state and local. Very good. So the motion would be to recommend it to pass. So Senator Miller recommends that this Senate File 766 as amended be recommended to pass and referred to state and local. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is adopted.
Madam Chair and members, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Clausen.
The advisory, yeah, they always want to see everything with an advisory council. They still do that. Yeah. They just want to see what it's done. But it's done, and rest set the precedent with the heads, like everyone. Like the bill. The role of the advisory council.
All right, Senator Clausen, we have Senate File 293.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. Senate File 293 is a tax deduction tax credit proposal for contributions to the Minnesota College Savings Plan, commonly referred to as the 529 College Savings Plan. The purpose of Senate File 293 is to provide an incentive for families trying to save for future higher education expenses, which will bring down the cost of student loan debt. And Madam Chair, I do have an A1 amendment.
Okay, the A1 amendment is before us.
Brief explanation, Madam Chair. The amendment prevents what we call double dipping on the tax form. The tax deduction cannot be used to also claim the tax credit allowed in the proposal, and vice versa. The tax credit cannot be used to claim a tax deduction. A tax filer may only use the tax deduction or tax credit, not both. That's basically what the amendment accomplishes.
Very good. There were two A1s, so for a moment I was looking at the wrong A1. Members, you want to look at the A1 that's associated with 293. So Senator Clausen moves the A1. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Some of this is going to be repeat information, but I just would like to remind that Minnesota four-year graduates carry the third highest amount of debt in the United States, over $30,000. Our state also has the fifth highest percentage of students with education-related debt at 71%. The 529 College Savings Plan allows parents, grandparents, and others to save for college costs. The Minnesota plan is operated by the Office of Higher Education and was created by the state to encourage individuals to save for post-secondary education. Earnings in the plan accrue free of Minnesota income tax, and qualified withdrawals are not subject to Minnesota income tax as well. Contributions to a 529 plan, however, are not deductible. The state retains ownership of the match amounts, and they may only be used for qualifying education expenses of the beneficiary at a higher education institution. Minnesota tax benefits related to the plan are available only to Minnesota taxpayers. Withdrawn funds used for college expenses are free from federal income taxes. And Minnesota is currently only one of 5 states which offer a college savings plan which do not offer a tax incentive for 529 college savings plans. At this point, I'd like just to review some of the key provisions of the bill. On page 4, section 1, subdivision 19B22 allows the Minnesota taxpayer to deduct up to $3,000 for a married couple filing a joint return and $1,500 for all other filers contributing to a 529 college savings plan. This is, excuse me, Madam
Bless
Chair.
you.
I've been under the weather for a couple of days here. This is an above-the-line calculation that reduces total taxable income, or in other words, a deduction. On page 5, subdivision 2, it defines eligibility for a 529 tax credit and also sets a maximum limit of $500 for a tax credit. And I won't go into some of the particulars, but I do have some examples if people would like to have some of those at a later time. Section 2, subdivision 3, page 6, explains the tax credit transfer. Tax filers must have a tax refund coming in order to qualify for the tax credit. If a tax filer is receiving a tax refund, the 529 credit is deducted from the amount of the refund and transferred to the 529 account up to $500. Again, the filer must have a tax refund coming in order to have that qualifying credit. In section 2, subdivision 5, it identifies how the credit would be repaid if a non-qualifying distribution of the funds takes place. The taxpayer is liable for the lesser sum of 10% of the amount of the qualifying distribution or the sum of the tax credits received over the years while contributing to the 529 program. And I'd like to turn your attention to the handouts from the National Conference of State Legislators that you have. There's other handouts, and they do provide a good overview of 529 plans. And with us today to provide testimony and respond to questions, Mr. Robert Helgeson, auditor. He is the auditor for the Minnesota College Savings Plan. Minnesota Office of Higher Education. I think Mr. Helgeson can provide an overview of the 529 plan as well.
Thank you, Mr. Helgeson, welcome.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I am Robert Helgeson. My official title is Audit Manager at the Minnesota Office of Higher Education. One of my other duties as assigned is the oversight of the Minnesota College Savings Plan contract. Just to give you, I was asked to give an overview of how 529 plans work in general and how our Minnesota state plan operates. The 529 plan is so named because the Federal Internal Revenue Code section which authorized the plans was Section 529. The Minnesota plan is authorized under Minnesota Statute 136G. The statute authorized the creation of a college savings plan which was to be housed in the office or overseen by the Office of Higher Education within a mandatory consulting function with the State Board of Investment. It also allowed for the office and the State Board of Investment, if they so chose, to contract with a third party to handle all of the various day-to-day functions. Given the limitations on staff and resources, we did elect to do that. Starting in 2001, an RFP process was completed, and the outside firm that was the recipient of the contract was Tuition Financing Incorporated, TFI, which is a subsidiary of TIAA-CREF. That initial contract ran for 8 years. There was a subsequent RFP done in 2009 and another one done in 2014. Each of those was again won by TFI, and they continue to serve the plan well and will be under contract for the next until 2019. TFI handles everything from setting up and operating the website, which is one of the primary places where people can go to learn about the plan. That website is www.mnsaves.org. They also staff a call center where people can call in and learn about our plan. They market the plan. They hire external accountants to audit the plan. They mail tax forms and statements, disclosure booklets, et cetera, to the owners of the plan. So they're performing most of the functions of the plan. My job is to perform the RFP process in consultation with the State Board of Investment, to oversee and make sure that TFI is doing what they're promised that they would be doing, that they are marketing the plan appropriately, so it's more of an oversight function. The State Board of Investment handles the choice of investments within the plan that are open to account owners. Each year, TFI will make recommendations as to perhaps delete an investment option, add some, tweak a few others, and it is within SBI's purview to decide to accept those recommendations, decline them, or in fact make a recommendation and choose their own way. So SBI controls the investment options, and they also track the investment performance on a continual basis. There are no state of Minnesota funds appropriated to operate the plan. TFI assesses a management fee along with any underlying fees for specific investment options to the account assets on a monthly basis. The state of Minnesota assesses a very small fee to the plan assets, which covers a portion of my salary and benefits and some of the overhead of OHE. It's a very small portion, and that fee continues to decrease with time. But there are no state appropriated dollars to operate the plan. People in Minnesota can open a Minnesota account in the plan with as little as $25 and can continue to contribute in increments of $25 or as little as $15 if it is done through a payroll deduction plan. The Minnesota plan is considered a direct sold plan, meaning that you do not go into a financial broker and sit down and say, oh, I'd like to get into a 529 plan. They do not sell the Minnesota plan. It is done, you sign up through the website or through calling in or filling out a paper application and mailing it in to TFI. There are two kinds of 529 plans, and they're both used across the country. There is a prepaid plan where you are buying units of tuition at today's prices and being able to utilize those at some point in the future. The other type is a savings plan. Minnesota's plan is considered a savings plan, where you are simply putting money into an account. You have choices of investment options, and our philosophy at the Office of Higher Ed, going back to the people who oversaw this function before me, was to try to keep the plan as simple, reasonably simple as possible. We agreed that, and based on my own experience in other areas of my career, if there are too many options provided, sometimes this can lead a person to a paralysis of sorts, and they simply walk away and don't open an account because they're just not sure what to choose. So the State Board of Investment and TFI have worked very hard to provide a range of investments ranging from extremely conservative to going full-blown into the stock market, so you have all levels of risk. There's also a base plan where you put money into an account, and based on the age of your child at the time you enter the money in the account, if they're newborn, then they're more aggressively invested, and as over time, as they approach the age of 18, the investments in the plan move to more conservative so that those funds are available when college expenses come due. That particular option enrolls about 75% of all the dollars going into the plan, so it is by far the most popular option. Account owners name a beneficiary at the time they open an account. There does not have to be any type of familial relation between the two parties. So you can open an account for your next door neighbor if you feel so inclined. The account owner can open multiple accounts, but each account owner can only have one account per beneficiary. One beneficiary, however, may have multiple accounts. They may have a grandparent who opened an account for them. They may have a parent. They may have an uncle or something. So there can be multiple accounts with the same beneficiary, but they are owned by different people. The maximum amount, according to the Minnesota limit, that one beneficiary can have in all of their accounts at any one time is currently $350,000. I believe Senator Clausen has already mentioned about earnings on accounts are tax-free as long as distributions are used appropriately. If a person does cash out a 529 account and does not use it for educational expenses as defined, then the earnings portion is subject to federal and state income tax as well as a 10% federal penalty. And here to close, I'd like to give you some statistics on our plan. These are as of September 30th of 2014, but there's not been a major change in these numbers since that time. There's currently approximately $1.16 billion in assets in the Minnesota plan. There are approximately 60,000 total accounts in the plan with 58,000 unique beneficiaries, and there are approximately 20,000 unique account owners in the plan. As Senator Clausen mentioned, we are one of the few states that do not have either a state income tax deduction or a state income tax credit. Amongst those other states are places like California, Massachusetts, and New Jersey, so some large states. I do know that California has attempted to move something through in the last few years. They've run into some issues in their own legislature, and it has not made it all the way through, but they do continue to try. So at that point, I think I will wrap up my comments and stand for any questions.
Questions for Mr. Helgeson? I do. Mr. Helgeson, with the advent of this bill, let's say it were to pass, how would our bill then compare to other favorably thought of 529 plans? Because we actually do hear from constituents who say that, you know, why should they go buy a plan in another state and get a better deal than in ours?
Madam Chair, thank you for raising that. I had the information there, but I didn't want to go long. Morningstar, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, rates the 529 plans each year. Each year, someone from the State Board of Investment and I actually participate in a conference call with a representative from Morningstar. As of a year ago, Minnesota's plan was rated as one of the 2 worst in the nation. During the RFP process, which culminated in a new contract being signed this past August, we were able to negotiate down the fees which TFI charges to manage the plan by approximately 50%. That was one of the 2 areas that was driving the low rating on our plan. It was the high fees relative to other similar plans, and also the lack of a state income tax incentive for contributions. So our office and SBI did everything we could to try to move things, and that did result in moving our plan up into the neutral category by Morningstar, which is where the bulk of the plans in the country are rated. So we did make progress in the past year. As far as the parameters, the amounts of the deductions and the credit, the deduction amounts are similar. I don't think that is unusual given the other universe of states which have a tax deduction. The tax credit, there are only 3 other states that have a tax credit, and each of those is structured very uniquely within their own states. There's really no comparison there. In looking at Senator Clausen's bill, the structure as is in the bill would tend to help lower and middle income people more so than higher income people, in my own opinion. I'm not speaking for the commissioner or for the governor, but that appears to be how it is structured.
That was my thoughts as I looked at it too. Thank you. Then last question I had was, I had the occasion to be briefed on the Florida model, which is you actually pay the tuition rate, and that's a guaranteed. And so you mentioned you like the simplicity of ours. Wondered if you had any thoughts. I understand that you too met with that gentleman.
Madam Chair, that's correct. Commissioner Poggemiller and I met with representatives from Florida's prepaid plan. Based on my own research and the materials that were left with me from the Florida plan, it appears if they are not the most successful prepaid plan in the country, they're certainly in the top 2. The Florida model has been very successful for them. They actually opened up their prepaid plan prior to opening up a savings plan. They have both. But their prepaid plan has been very successful for them compared to other states that have had prepaid or have prepaid plans, such as Texas and Illinois. And what we came away from that finding, and I've had conversations with the executive director over the phone as well of the Florida plan, was that one of the main things was a state guarantee that when you buy a prepaid tuition contract, that the person buying that contract knows that it's guaranteed by the state. So even if the state does not invest those funds wisely, when it comes time to cash it in for their child to go to college, they are not going to be asked to pay more out of pocket. And that is why and the amazing thing is they've never had 1 cent that the state has had to come up with, but just having that language and having a very good investment process, they have done a wonderful job. And the Commissioner Poggemiller, after that meeting, has asked me to think more about this and determine if we should get a group together to have further conversations. So at this point, it's just another possibility, but one that is worth looking at.
Thank you, Mr. Helgeson. I hope you do that investigation, and we look forward to having you bring it back to our committee. And Senator Clausen, you must have decided you didn't want to include anything like that in this bill in terms of looking at that for the future.
And Madam Chair, that was brought to my attention at a fairly late state after we had already been working on the current bill before you. I think it is something that we can look at in the future. There are states that have both plans. Since we do have a 529 plan in operation here, I think there are some improvements that are in the bill that we could make, and we can look for a different model in the future.
Thank you. And did you have one more testifier?
Yes, I do. Mr. Paul Sirkvenik he is from the Minnesota Private Colleges, president of that group.
Good afternoon, Mr. Sirkvenik.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Paul Sirkvenik. I'm the president of the Minnesota Private College Council. Private College Council and our member colleges, 17 private nonprofit liberal arts colleges in Minnesota, support Senate File 293, and we want to be on record indicating our support to this committee. Our colleges support this bill because we believe it will help families to save for college by creating a tax incentive to encourage annual college savings. I think you're all aware that savings rates in the United States are really not very good. I pulled something from a report our research staff does every year. Between 1960 and 1985, the savings rate in the United States, based on savings as a percent of disposable income, fluctuated between 7 and 11%. 7 and 11% between 1960 and 1985. Since 1985, the savings rate has fluctuated between 2 and 7% across our country. So there's been a big change in savings habits, and that is, in my opinion, showing up in the challenges people face in paying for college. I want to tell you one fact about family saving for college. In 2013, Sallie Mae reported in its annual How America Pays for College survey that the average contributions from parent savings, including 529 plans, retirement savings, and other savings and investments, met just 10% of the total cost of attendance across all types of colleges in the United States. So 10% of the cost of education, higher education, is paid through parent savings, a pretty small share. The great benefit of this bill, as Senator Clausen said, is that it reduces the amount of parent and student borrowing that will be needed to pay for college. Putting it another way, the consequence of not saving for college is increased borrowing by students and parents. Beyond the benefit of incentivizing college savings, there's one other important benefit of this bill that I want to call to your attention. It's important because it helps both lower income and middle income families deal with the challenge of paying for college. Generally, federal and state financial aid programs like the Pell Grant and the Minnesota State Grant focus financial aid where the need is the greatest, on lower income families and students. This bill, but because real family incomes have been declining for a decade, college is becoming harder to afford for many middle-class families whose incomes are not low enough to qualify for a Pell or a state grant, but who still find paying for college to be a really, really big challenge. So this bill is a significant way that the state can help middle-class families with the cost of college, while at the same time encouraging savings and encouraging those families to plan ahead for the cost of college. In that sense, it's really a win-win both for the state of Minnesota and for the families who will benefit from the tax credit. So we hope you'll pass the bill, and we hope the legislature will enact the bill.
Thank you very much. Senator Clausen.
Madam Chair, we do have a technical oral amendment.
Go ahead. I think we'll call on Ms. Weidman.
There you go.
Senator Clausen, members of the committee, on line 5.12, it's about in the middle of the sentence, delete after the word of less than 0, but. 5.11. On mine, it's on 5.12.
Gotcha. Okay. So could you say it again?
After the word of, strike less than 0, but.
Okay. Senator Clausen moves the oral amendment. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's adopted. Very good. Any concluding comments?
You know, I think last week, this committee heard some very compelling testimony by a number of students about the amount of debt that they have following their graduation from college. And I think that this bill would help in that regard, in that it would help parents look a little bit long-term. It'll certainly help lower-income, middle-income families save for that college education. And I think it's just one measure, one means that we can try to address the growing college debt.
So Senator Clausen, would you like to move Senate File 293
Yes,
as
Madam Chair.
amended?
Yes, as amended, I would like to move Senate File 293 for consideration.
And the motion would be to move Senate File 293 as amended and re-referred to the Committee on Taxes. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion is adopted. You have one more bill before